The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the grand ballroom, scattering golden light across polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers. Guests arrived in a river of elegance, women in flowing gowns embroidered with delicate patterns, men in tailored suits and crisp bow ties. Laughter floated above the soft hum of the string quartet, weaving into the scent of fresh roses and jasmine that filled the air. It was her sister's wedding, and everything, every detail, every smile, every sparkling glass, looked perfect. She adjusted the hem of her cream-colored dress, fingers tracing the subtle embroidery she had chosen for herself. A gentle knot of excitement and apprehension sat in her stomach. The wedding was supposed to be joyous, a celebration of love, but beneath the glittering surface, a quiet unease tugged at her. She caught a glimpse of her husband across the room, his jaw tight, a polite smile masking something colder. Something she had sensed for weeks. If you enjoy stories where calm hides storms, quietly like, subscribe, and share, because the story is just beginning. Her sister, radiant in a flowing white gown, descended the grand staircase, her veil shimmering like morning mist. "It's my day," the bride whispered to her as their eyes met, "Thank you for being here." The protagonist smiled, squeezing her sister's hand, yet a shadow of doubt flickered across her own expression. The polished wooden dance floor reflected the sparkling lights, the delicate silverware, and the carefully arranged bouquets, but it could not hide the tension coiling quietly between her and the man she had promised herself to. "Everything looks perfect," her mother said, guiding a guest toward the seating area. Her voice was warm, but there was a strange edge, an unspoken expectation that she perform, that she smile, that she ignore the whispering doubts. She took a slow breath, listening to the hum of conversations, the soft clinking of champagne glasses, and the faint echo of the violin. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe in the illusion, that all was well, that love and family always aligned perfectly. Yet, as the champagne flute sparkled and the guests settled into their places, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. A quiet, invisible line seemed to tremble just beneath the surface, a hint that the day might not remain flawless. She didn't know it yet, but the elegance, the laughter, and the celebration would soon collide with a revelation that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband, her family, and the life she had built. The music swelled gently as the wedding party prepared for the next ceremony, but a subtle tension lingered, a heartbeat of unease, signaling that this perfect day was on the cusp of becoming unforgettable, and not in the way anyone expected. The music grew livelier as the reception officially began, a blend of soft piano and rhythmic drums filling the grand ballroom. Waiters moved gracefully between round tables draped in ivory silk, balancing trays of sparkling drinks and delicate appetizers. From a distance, everything still looked flawless, laughter, applause, camera flashes capturing the bride and groom's first dance rehearsal. But up close, the illusion began to thin. She spotted her husband standing near the tall windows overlooking the city skyline. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows behind him, turning his silhouette sharp and distant. He wasn't laughing like the other guests. He wasn't even watching the couple. Instead, he was staring down at his phone. Her phone buzzed softly in her clutch. A message she had sent him 20 minutes earlier, "Where are you? Mom is asking for us." Remained unread. She approached him slowly, her heels clicking lightly against the marble floor. "You disappeared," she said gently, forcing warmth into her voice. He glanced up, offering a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just handling something important." "Important enough to ignore me?" she asked, trying to keep it playful. He slipped his phone into his pocket. "Don't start," he muttered under his breath. The words were quiet, but they struck harder than they should have. For weeks now, there had been moments like this, cold silences at dinner, unexplained late nights, calls taken in another room. When she asked questions, he brushed them aside. When she tried to reconnect, he turned distant. Even that morning, while she adjusted his tie before leaving for the wedding, he had stepped back as if her touch irritated him. "You look beautiful," he said now, but it sounded rehearsed. She searched his face for something familiar, the man who once laughed too loudly at her jokes, who used to hold her hand even in crowded rooms. Instead, she saw calculation. resentment. Or perhaps something worse. Across the ballroom, her sister twirled joyfully, guests cheering her on. The scent of fresh lilies drifted through the air, mixing with expensive cologne and polished wood. Everything sparkled. Yet beside her, her marriage felt like cracked glass, still intact, but fragile. One wrong move, and it would shatter. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly, barely audible over the music. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted past her shoulder toward the center of the room, where the microphone stood waiting for speeches. "You'll see," he finally said. A chill slid down her spine. And as the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone to gather attention, she realized the cracks beneath his smile were about to split wide open. The applause was still echoing from her father's heartfelt speech when it happened. Crystal glasses clinked gently as guests wiped away emotional tears. The bride leaned into her groom, glowing under the chandelier light. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly. "And now," he announced, "if anyone else would like to share a few words." A chair scraped sharply against the marble floor. Her husband stood. At first, she assumed he was going to congratulate her sister. That was normal. Expected. She even felt a small flicker of relief, maybe this was the important thing he had mentioned. He walked calmly toward the stage, adjusting his suit jacket. The room quieted politely. He took the microphone from the MC with steady hands. "I won't take long," he said smoothly. His voice carried across the grand ballroom, confident and controlled. She felt dozens of eyes shift between them. He looked directly at her. "For a long time," he continued, "I've been pretending." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Her heartbeat slowed, then pounded violently in her ears. "Pretending to be in a marriage that no longer works." The words didn't register at first. They floated, meaningless, in the air heavy with perfume and champagne. He stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward her. Every movement felt amplified, the echo of his shoes, the tightening of her chest, the tightening silence in the room. When he stopped in front of her, he pulled a folded envelope from inside his jacket. "I think it's time everyone knew," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "I've filed for divorce." Gasps. A glass shattered somewhere in the back. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her sister froze, bouquet trembling in her grip. He extended the envelope toward her. "These are the papers." For a moment, she couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The white envelope felt heavier than stone when it touched her fingers. She became painfully aware of the camera still recording, the whispers spreading like wildfire. "Is this a joke?" she whispered. His expression didn't change. "No." Heat flooded her face. Not tears, just humiliation. Public. Deliberate. He had chosen this moment. Her sister's wedding. A room full of relatives, business associates, friends. She looked around. Pity in some eyes. Curiosity in others. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to destroy her. The microphone still lay on the stage behind him. The room hung suspended in silence. And in that silence, between humiliation and reaction, something inside her shifted. She realized she had two choices. Break. Or stand. The ballroom felt smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. As if the walls had leaned inward, trapping every whisper, every stare, every breath inside a shrinking space centered on her. The envelope rested in her hands. She could hear it, the sound of silk dresses shifting as guests leaned toward one another, the faint hiss of someone whispering, "Did he just say divorce?" A phone camera lifted discreetly from a nearby table. Someone else gasped again, softer this time. Her husband stood in front of her, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. There it was, that almost invisible smirk. Not wide. Not obvious. Just enough to show satisfaction. He was waiting. Waiting for tears. For trembling hands. For her to run out of the ballroom humiliated. The chandeliers above sparkled mercilessly, light bouncing off crystal and gold decor illuminating her like a spotlight. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. She felt her mother's eyes on her. Her sister frozen near the stage. Her father halfway risen from his seat. Her heart pounded, but her face did not move. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her gaze to the envelope. Her fingers traced the edge. The paper felt crisp. Prepared. Planned. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. She inhaled deeply. The scent of roses and champagne filled her lungs. For a split second, emotion surged, anger, hurt, disbelief, but she pressed it down like closing a lid over boiling water. When she looked back up at him, her eyes were clear. "Are you finished?" she asked softly. The question startled him. Just slightly. His smirk twitched. "You have the papers," he replied. "I thought honesty was best." A quiet scoff rippled through the crowd. She nodded once. Calm. Composed. He shifted his weight, almost impatient now. "You can sign them later," he added, louder, making sure the room heard. "No need to make a scene." Make a scene. The irony nearly made her smile. Instead of shrinking, she straightened her posture. Her heels felt steadier against the marble floor. The humiliation he intended began transforming into something else, clarity. He thought this was control. He thought this was power. But he had forgotten one thing. She wasn't unprepared. Without another word, she stepped around him. Not toward the exit. Toward the stage. A wave of confusion swept through the guests as she reached for the microphone. And that was when the room truly went silent. The soft echo of her heels against the marble floor sounded louder than the music ever had. One step. Then another. Every eye in the grand ballroom followed her as she walked toward the stage. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen stars, casting golden light over silk gowns and polished shoes. No one moved. Even the waiters stood still, trays suspended midair. Behind her, she could feel her husband's stare burning into her back. She didn't look at him. Instead, she climbed the small steps to the stage, the same stage where moments ago laughter and love had filled the air. The microphone rested on its stand, slightly tilted from when he had spoken. For a brief second, she paused. Her sister stood off to the side, bouquet trembling in her hands, eyes wide with confusion. Their gazes locked. There was fear there, but also trust. The protagonist reached forward and gently adjusted the microphone. The faint screech of feedback sliced through the silence. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. She looked out over the crowd, rows of familiar faces. Relatives from the city. Old family friends from their hometown. Business associates seated at the front tables. All of them waiting. Waiting for tears. Waiting for a breakdown. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't forced. It was calm. "I'm sorry," she began softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I didn't expect to give a speech tonight." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. She held up the envelope slightly between her fingers. "But since my husband decided this was the perfect moment to make an announcement," she continued, "I suppose it's only fair that I make one too." The air seemed to tighten. Across the room, she saw him stiffen. Guests leaned forward in their chairs. A glass clinked faintly against a plate. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, "What is she doing?" She let the silence stretch, just long enough to reclaim control of it. For the first time that evening, she felt powerful. Not because she had been humiliated, but because she had chosen not to collapse. She glanced once toward her husband, not with anger, not with pain, but with something far more unsettling. Certainty. "You see," she said, her voice now carrying clearly through the ballroom, "there's something everyone here deserves to know." And as the room held its breath, the balance of the night shifted completely. The perfect wedding was no longer his stage. It was hers. The ballroom felt smaller now. Not because the chandeliers had dimmed or the walls had closed in, but because the truth was about to take up all the space. She stood at the center of the stage, the microphone steady in her hand, the envelope resting lightly against the podium. Rows of guests watched her as if she were about to detonate something fragile and expensive. Her husband rose halfway from his chair. "Enough," he muttered sharply, forcing a laugh. "You're emotional. Let's not ruin the evening." She tilted her head slightly, almost amused. "Ruin it," she repeated calmly. "Oh, I'm not ruining anything. I'm clarifying." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. She opened the envelope. The soft slide of paper against paper sounded louder than the orchestra ever had. "I found out about the affair 3 months ago," she said, her voice smooth, measured. "Not because you confessed, but because you're careless." Gasps burst across the room. One aunt covered her mouth. A businessman at the front table slowly lowered his glass. Her husband's face drained of color. "That's a lie." She lifted her phone and tapped the screen. Within seconds, the projector behind her flickered to life, screenshots of messages, hotel reservations, photographs stamped with dates. The evidence glowed against the white wedding backdrop. "I stayed silent," she continued, "because I needed time. Time to speak with lawyers. Time to review documents. Time to understand exactly how much of our shared empire was actually in my name." Now the murmurs were louder, urgent. She placed another paper on the podium. "This morning, before coming here, I signed the final documents. I filed for divorce first." A collective inhale filled the ballroom. "And as for the company," she added, her gaze locking onto his, 70% of the controlling shares were transferred to me by your father before he passed. He believed in loyalty." Her husband's chair scraped violently against the marble as he stood. "You can't." "I already did." The words were soft. Final. She smiled, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "I came tonight to bless my sister's new beginning," she said, turning briefly toward the bride. "Not to mourn the end of mine." The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring at him. Not her. For the first time, he looked small beneath the glittering lights. "And one more thing," she added gently, resting a hand over her stomach. "The child I'm carrying will grow up knowing strength, not betrayal." Silence swallowed the room. Then somewhere near the back, a single clap echoed. And just like that, the storm had changed direction. For a moment, no one moved. The chandeliers still shimmered overhead, the jasmine garlands still perfumed the air, the light band still stood frozen with their instruments in hand, but the power in the room had shifted completely. All eyes were no longer on her. They were on him. Her husband stood near the head table, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed at his temple. The confident smirk he had worn earlier was gone. In its place was something raw. Cornered. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice louder now, but no longer steady. "You're trying to manipulate everyone." A murmur rose immediately. "Manipulate?" An elderly uncle from the village side of the family stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "Beta," he said firmly, addressing the husband, "documents do not manipulate. Facts do not manipulate." A few guests nodded. At the front table, one of his business partners quietly reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his phone. He stepped aside, whispering urgently to someone on the other end of the line. Damage control. Too late. Her sister, the bride, still stood in her crimson wedding lehenga, gold embroidery catching the light. Her kohl-lined eyes glistened, not from tears of joy anymore, but from disbelief. She looked between them, between the sister who had protected her since childhood and the man who had tried to humiliate her on her own wedding day. "You did this here?" she whispered to him, her voice shaking. "At my wedding?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. The guests were no longer whispering behind fans or napkins. They were speaking openly now. "I always thought something was off about him. Too charming. too polished. One by one, chairs scraped against marble as relatives shifted closer to the protagonist. Her mother reached the stage first, placing a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. An aunt followed. Then cousins. It wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. He stood alone beneath the lights that once flattered him. The projector still displayed the evidence behind her, undeniable, glowing truth. And in that truth, his arrogance began to crumble visibly. His shoulders dropped. His voice softened. "Let's talk privately," he muttered. She looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred, but with finality. "No," she replied calmly. "You wanted an audience." A painful silence followed. Across the hall, the bride slowly removed her hand from his sleeve. And as the musicians quietly set their instruments down, the celebration transformed, not into ruin, but into reckoning. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm, it seemed, had only just begun. The air inside the ballroom felt heavy, but not with shame. With consequence. She stood at the center of it all, the documents resting neatly on the podium. The projector had gone dark. The whispers had faded into a tense, watchful silence. Even the thunder outside seemed to pause, as though the sky itself was waiting. Her husband stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You've made your point," he said through clenched teeth. "Don't take this any further." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that night. Gone was the charm. Gone was the carefully crafted image. What stood before her now was a man afraid of losing control. "I'm not taking it further," she replied softly. "I'm finishing it." She picked up the pen. It was simple. Silver. Elegant. Just like the woman holding it. The scratching sound of ink against paper echoed faintly through the microphone still resting nearby. One signature. Then another initial where required. Calm. Unhurried. Final. When she finished, she lifted the documents and placed them gently into his trembling hands. "They're already filed," she said. "This copy is yours." He stared at the pages as though they might disappear if he blinked hard enough. "You'll regret this," he muttered. A faint smile touched her lips, not mocking, not bitter. "No," she answered. "I would have regretted staying." A soft sound broke the silence. Clapping. It began near the back, slow, uncertain. Then another pair of hands joined. And another. Within seconds, the applause filled the grand hall, rising beneath crystal chandeliers and floral arches. It wasn't loud or wild. It was respectful. Acknowledging strength. Her sister, still glowing in red bridal silk, pressed her palms together in silent pride. Her mother wiped away tears, not of sorrow, but of relief. She stepped down from the stage. Each step felt lighter than the one before. The marble floor that once seemed cold beneath her heels now felt steady, grounding. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. The grand doors of the ballroom opened, letting in the scent of rain and the distant hum of the city streets below. The storm had finally broken outside, cool droplets tapping against the pavement. She paused just at the threshold. For a moment, she inhaled deeply. Then she walked forward into the rain, not defeated, not abandoned. But free. And behind her, the echoes of applause slowly faded into the beginning of something new. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time she reached the edge of the courtyard. City lights shimmered against the wet pavement, reflecting gold and silver like scattered coins at her feet. In the distance, traffic hummed steadily, unaware that inside the grand hall behind her, an empire of illusion had just collapsed. She paused beneath a neem tree near the entrance, its leaves dripping rhythmically after the storm. The cool air touched her face, washing away the heat of the ballroom, the stares, the whispers. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Breathing. Her hand rested lightly over her stomach, protective, steady. Not fragile. Not broken. Strong. Humiliation, she realized, only works when you accept it. Inside that hall, he had expected tears. He had expected her to crumble beneath the weight of public exposure. In his mind, silence meant weakness. Calm meant defeat. But silence can also be preparation. Silence can be strategy. And when the moment is right, silence becomes revelation. She began walking down the stone pathway that led toward the gates, her heels clicking softly against the wet surface. Security guards stepped aside respectfully. A few distant guests lingered under the awning, watching her with something new in their eyes. Not pity. Respect. One woman from the extended family approached her gently. "You were brave," she whispered. She offered a small smile. "No," she replied softly. "I was ready." The car waiting at the gate pulled forward, headlights cutting through the mist. As the driver opened the door, she glanced back once, not at him, not at the hall, but at the sky. The storm clouds were breaking apart. A thin line of moonlight slipped through. True power, she thought, is not loud. It doesn't beg for validation. It doesn't shout to be seen. True power is knowing your worth so deeply that no one can convince you otherwise. As she settled into the car, the door closing with a quiet finality, the city stretched ahead, wide, uncertain, full of possibility. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of one she would write herself. And somewhere, far behind her, the echoes of arrogance faded into nothing, while dignity drove forward into the night.